Welcome the Lord's chosen. There are moments when the world doesn't apologize for mistreating you. It simply corrects itself. Something flipped, and it wasn't subtle. One day, the pressure was constant, the resistance loud, the obstacles lined up like they had a shared calendar. The next, the noise thinned out. Doors didn't just open. They stopped being locked in the first place. That kind of shift doesn't come from luck, mood swings, or people suddenly becoming nice. It comes from authority changing hands behind the scenes. Here's a grounded fact most people never talk about. In every system, spiritual, social, or institutional, protection only activates when a person's removal would disrupt the balance. Until then, struggle is tolerated. The moment you become essential, interference is no longer permitted. That's not inspiration. That's how order works. This is why the flip feels so fast. What looks like an overnight turnaround is actually the final stage of a long, silent evaluation. While you were enduring, something else was observing. Patterns were logged, motives were weighed, consequences were calculated. And when the numbers stopped favoring your suppression, the system adjusted without sending a memo. Now someone is defending you fiercely, and they're not doing it with speeches or announcements. They're doing it by changing outcomes. Conversations end differently. Decisions suddenly fall in your favor. People who were bold yesterday are cautious today, like they just remembered rent is due and consequences exist. Even the resistance seems confused, as if the rules changed and nobody told them, except the person who needed to know. There's a bit of humor in it, really. The same energy that once had you explaining yourself is now watching others explain why they're uncomfortable. No revenge, no drama, no victory speech. Just a quiet, undeniable shift. The kind that lets you breathe, stand straighter, and realize something important. This was never about proving anything. It was about surviving long enough for protection to become necessary. And now the flip has happened. Number one, the resistance stopped because the authority shifted. What actually changed wasn't people's attitudes or the situation on the surface. It was who had the final say. Resistance only survives when it has permission to exist. The moment that permission is withdrawn, everything that once felt heavy loses strength almost instantly. That's why it feels sudden. Nothing dramatic has to happen, no announcement, no explanation. The opposition simply runs out of oxygen. For a long time, you were dealing with pushback that felt personal. It wasn't. It was structural. You were moving under a level of authority that allowed interference, delays, and unnecessary battles. You kept thinking if you explained better, worked harder, or stayed quieter, things would ease up. But resistance doesn't respond to effort. It responds to hierarchy. Once authority shifts, effort becomes optional. This is why the same people who once challenged you now hesitate. They didn't suddenly grow wiser. They sensed a change in consequences. Power always announces itself through outcomes, not words. When decisions start landing differently, people adjust without needing instructions. The energy in the room changes because everyone can feel that something higher has stepped in. What's important here is that this shift didn't happen because you complained enough or proved yourself loudly. It happened because you reached a point where blocking you caused more damage than letting you move forward. Authority intervenes when imbalance becomes costly. At that stage, resistance isn't bravery anymore, it's liability. This also explains why you didn't get closure or apologies. Authority doesn't negotiate with obstacles. It overrides them. Things don't get resolved, they get rerouted. The doors that used to resist you don't apologize for being closed. They simply stop being locked. The most unsettling part for others is that you didn't have to fight back. When authority changes, silence becomes powerful without trying to be. Not because silence is a strategy, but because decisions are already made elsewhere. You're not being protected. because you demanded it. You're being protected because the structure itself adjusted. That's why the resistance stopped. Not because the world softened, but because it reordered itself around a different center of command. Number 2, you were exhausting the wrong layer of reality. For a long time, you kept pouring energy into what you could see. Conversations, reactions, delays, attitudes, closed doors. You thought if you pushed harder there, things would finally move. But that layer was never where the real decisions were being made. It was just the surface where outcomes showed up after everything was already decided. That's why nothing responded properly. You were negotiating with effects, not causes. You were trying to fix symptoms instead of the system creating them. And the system doesn't argue back. It simply keeps running. This is exhausting because surface-level effort gives the illusion of progress. You talk, explain, adjust, prove, tolerate, and repeat. It feels productive, but it drains you because it never touches the source. That's why you could do everything right and still get nowhere. You weren't weak or misguided. You were focused on the wrong layer. The real layer is quieter. It's where authority, permission, timing, and alignment live. When that layer isn't ready, surface effort gets ignored, no matter how sincere it is. When it shifts, surface problems resolve with almost no effort at all. That's the part people don't understand until it happens to them. This is also why the change felt sudden. You didn't suddenly become smarter or more deserving overnight. You stopped needing to force movement at the visible level because something deeper finally aligned. The pressure you felt before was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to keep you moving until the deeper layer caught up. Once that shift happened, things you used to fight simply stopped fighting back. Conversations shortened, delays disappeared. Resistance lost interest, not because people became kind, but because the system no longer required your struggle. This realization can be uncomfortable. It forces you to admit that effort alone doesn't control outcomes. Placement does, alignment does, authority does, and sometimes the most draining seasons happen because you're early, not because you're wrong. Now you're operating where small actions create real movement. That's how you know you're finally engaging the right layer. Life doesn't feel easier because everything is perfect. It feels easier because you're no longer trying to push against something that was never designed to move for you in the first place. Number 3, someone finally saw the pattern they couldn't ignore. For the longest time, it felt like no one was paying attention. Every move you made, every effort you put in, every time you endured quietly, it seemed invisible. People treated your persistence like background noise, like it didn't matter. But the truth is, patterns never go unnoticed forever. They have a way of revealing themselves to the right eyes at the right time. What changed isn't that people suddenly decided you were worth defending. What changed is that someone finally recognized the story you were telling without words. Every setback you survived, every trap you avoided, every situation you handled with patience or clarity, it all created a pattern. At first, it was easy for others to dismiss. Too small, too subtle, too inconvenient to acknowledge. But patterns have a persistence that can't be argued with. Eventually, even the skeptics can't ignore them. The pattern you created spoke louder than complaints, explanations, or defenses ever could. It revealed strength where people expected weakness, consistency where they expected chaos, and integrity where they expected compromise. It exposed the difference between those who operate from ego and those who operate from principle. That difference is what demanded attention. Recognition doesn't always feel like recognition. Often it comes in ways that are quiet but decisive. Suddenly people who ignored or opposed you hesitate. Decisions tilt in your favor. Allies step forward, not because of persuasion, but because they can't deny the logic of the pattern. It's as if the universe itself is saying, This is who belongs. This is who matters. And here's the subtle truth. The moment someone sees your pattern, protection doesn't come as charity or kindness. It comes as necessity. People defend what is consistent, what is proven, and what cannot be ignored without risk. That's why the shift feels sudden, even though it was built silently over time. What looked like overnight change was actually the natural outcome of your persistence being impossible to dismiss. The world doesn't always notice effort, but it always notices patterns. And when the right eyes see them, everything changes. Number 4, the attacks became evidence, not weapons. Everything meant to harm you, every insult, every smear, every attempt to slow you down, didn't have the effect the attackers intended. Instead of breaking you, those very attacks built a record of your resilience, your clarity, and your consistency. What was designed to be a weapon became undeniable proof of your strength. The irony is brutal. The same energy that was supposed to bury you now highlights exactly why you couldn't be buried. People often don't realize that attacks are only dangerous if they go unnoticed. If they land in a vacuum, they can wound, frustrate, or discourage. But when every attempt is observed, catalogued, and survived, it flips the narrative entirely. Each obstacle that was meant to humiliate you now demonstrates that you endure where others would fold, that you navigate chaos where others panic, that you rise when others expect you to fall. The more intense the attack, the stronger the evidence of your fortitude becomes. This is why protection often arrives suddenly and decisively. The same actions that were intended to push you down now make it impossible for others to ignore you. Those who watch, whether allies or authority figures, see the pattern of survival and can't deny it. Attacks stop being personal. They become data points in a larger story, a story that now favors you. What was once designed to silence you becomes the exact reason you can't be silenced. It's a kind of reverse logic that feels almost cruel to your enemies. They put effort into destruction, only to create the proof that validates you. Every lie that was meant to stick, every delay that was meant to frustrate, every undermining comment, they all end up as markers showing that you were never dependent on their approval or limited by their intentions. The attacks don't disappear, they don't vanish, but their power is gone. They are no longer weapons. They are evidence of your endurance, your clarity, and your inevitability. And in that transformation, the world begins to adjust around you because anyone who sees clearly knows you can't be shaken. Number 5, the timing flipped because you were ready, not because they were kind. Nothing changed overnight because someone decided to be generous. The flip didn't happen because luck smiled or because circumstances finally decided to favor you. It happened because you reached a point where you could handle what was coming. Timing is rarely about fairness, it's about readiness. The universe or life or whatever force governs outcomes doesn't rush things for comfort. It moves when preparation meets opportunity. For too long, it may have felt like you were stuck, waiting for a break that never came. You probably watched others get what you wanted, wondering why it always seemed just out of reach. But those seasons weren't wasted. They were refining you. The delays, the frustration, the long nights of endurance, they were all quietly building the version of yourself that could finally receive and sustain the change without collapsing under it. The shift feels sudden because it's invisible in the making. No one sees the preparation, the growth, the internal restructuring that happens when someone is ready for a breakthrough. That's why it seems like overnight miracles are rare. They aren't miracles. They're the result of alignment between readiness and action, the moment when struggle has shaped you into someone the world has to respect, someone the system can no longer ignore, someone whose presence now demands protection. And here's the truth that surprises most people. Readiness doesn't require perfection. It only requires the capacity to handle what comes. You weren't perfect yesterday, and you're not perfect today. But you've survived enough, learned enough, and endured enough that when the flip happened, it landed on solid ground. It didn't topple you, it elevated you. So the change isn't about kindness, sympathy, or luck. It's about preparedness. The flip aligns with the person who has endured, who has persisted, and who has built the resilience to step fully into what's theirs. That's why when it happens, it feels sudden, undeniable, and unstoppable. The timing flipped because you were ready, not because anyone else decided it should. Number 6. Someone intervened because your collapse would have been costly. The moment everything shifted, it wasn't random. It wasn't because someone felt sorry for you or decided you deserved it. It was because your presence, your persistence, and your survival mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. There comes a point where letting you fall is no longer just inconvenient. It becomes dangerous, expensive, or disruptive. That's when intervention shows up, fierce and undeniable, and it often looks sudden to the outside world. For a long time, you were exposed, carrying weight, navigating obstacles, and enduring pressure that felt personal. The attacks, the delays, the opposition, they weren't always fair, but they were tolerated because no one yet realized the real cost of your collapse. People underestimated how your presence mattered, how your endurance stabilized situations, held balance, and maintained an unseen order. When they finally understood, the switch flipped. Protection isn't emotional, it's strategic. It arrives not because someone likes you, but because losing you would cost more than anyone is willing to pay. This is why the shift feels immediate. One day resistance is loud, doors are closed, and support seems absent. The next, decisions are made in your favor, allies appear, and obstacles dissolve. It's not magic, it's the recognition that your fall was no longer sustainable for those who hold influence. When intervention becomes necessary, it doesn't announce itself in whispers. It reshapes outcomes, reroutes energy, and adjusts systems so that what was once impossible now becomes inevitable. The irony is that you didn't even have to demand it. You weren't calling for backup, explaining yourself, or proving your value. The forces that govern outcomes simply recognized that continuing without you would be more trouble than they were willing to face. That's how true protection works. It doesn't negotiate, it calculates, and it acts decisively. So when someone steps in fiercely, know this: it isn't about favoritism or luck, it's about necessity. Your endurance has made you essential, and once that's clear, the system itself will ensure you are defended. What was once opposition now becomes invisible, irrelevant, or neutralized, because your presence is too valuable to ignore. Number 7, you outgrew the narrative written about you. For years, people tried to define you. Labels were thrown, assumptions were made, and expectations were set as if you were just a character in someone else's story. You were the problem, the weak link, the obstacle, or the one who didn't fit. They tried to contain you, control you, and predict your moves. But the truth is, narratives only last as long as they match reality. The moment you evolve beyond what they expect, the story collapses. Outgrowing a narrative doesn't happen quietly. It happens in the small, consistent choices you make, the decisions they underestimate, the boundaries you refuse to cross, the resilience you display when they assumed you'd break. Every time you acted in alignment with your truth rather than their expectations, you chipped away at the version of yourself that existed only in their minds. Eventually, that version becomes irrelevant. They keep talking, but their words no longer carry weight. When you outgrow a narrative, the shift feels sudden, even shocking. People who once dismissed or opposed you pause, confused because the story they were using to understand you no longer works. Resistance becomes awkward because it's directed at someone who doesn't exist in the form they imagined. Doors open, opportunities appear, and support arrives. not because you asked for it, but because reality now requires a new narrative. What's powerful about this is that it's not about changing anyone else's perception. It's about growing into the version of yourself that cannot be contained or misrepresented. You don't have to fight to prove them wrong. You simply stop fitting the frame they tried to impose. Their narrative falls away, and with it, the energy that once held you down evaporates. Outgrowing a narrative is liberation disguised as change. It rewrites the rules of engagement without a single word, and once it happens, the world is forced to acknowledge you not as they imagined, but as you actually are, stronger, untouchable, and undeniably real. Number 8, the delay was gathering witnesses, not punishment. For a long time, it felt like life was dragging its feet, like doors were closed just to make you suffer. Every obstacle, every delay, every moment of waiting felt personal, as if the universe was testing you unfairly. But the truth is, those delays were never about punishment. They were about observation, preparation, and alignment. Life has a way of gathering witnesses quietly, and timing is rarely about speed. It's about who is ready to see, who is listening, and who will act when the moment comes. Every struggle, every season of endurance was recorded in ways you couldn't see. Those who mattered, the ones whose decisions would eventually shape your breakthrough, were watching, taking note of your consistency, your patience, and your strength. They weren't judging you in real time. They were gathering proof. Proof that you could handle what was coming. Proof that you deserved to move without unnecessary obstacles. Proof that the protection that arrived would not be wasted. This is why the flip feels sudden. One moment, nothing seems to change. The next, it's as if the world itself shifted overnight. Doors open without effort, resistance disappears, and people who ignored you before now act in your favor. The reality is that nothing changed overnight. The delay was simply the time it took to assemble the witnesses who could validate your worth and ensure that when the switch flipped, it stuck. The irony is that patience is often mistaken for weakness. People see waiting and think you're stagnant or powerless, but in truth, patience in the right season is the most strategic form of power. The delay wasn't punishment. It was preparation for you and for the system around you. When the change finally comes, it doesn't just benefit you. It validates your endurance. It proves your consistency, and it shows that everything you went through was necessary. The delay wasn't a setback. It was the invisible alignment that made your breakthrough inevitable, undeniable, and irreversible. Number 9. Your endurance changed how power assessed you. Endurance isn't just about surviving challenges. It's about sending a signal that cannot be ignored. Every time you endured when others expected you to break, every time you stayed consistent when chaos surrounded you, every time you persisted without seeking validation, you were quietly recalibrating how power saw you. Power doesn't only respond to action, it responds to reliability, to the kind of presence that refuses to crumble under pressure. And once you prove you cannot be easily shaken, the rules change. For a long time, those in control or influence treated you like anyone else. They assumed you would bend, fail, or be manipulated like the rest. But endurance is different from mere effort. It's the silent weight that shifts perception over time. It's not loud, it doesn't demand attention, but it's undeniable. It tells those who measure influence and strength that you are a factor to consider. You aren't just surviving, you are a variable that alters outcomes, a force that must be accounted for in decisions, strategies, and alignments. This is why the change feels sudden. People who opposed or ignored you for so long now act with caution. Their assessment has shifted, not because you convinced them with words, but because your consistency and strength have left them no choice. Endurance creates credibility that no argument can dispute. It forces recognition and demands recalibration, even among those who never intended to acknowledge it. The power dynamics didn't bend because of luck, charm, or manipulation. They bent because endurance is visible in ways that can't be faked. Every test you faced, every trap you navigated, every storm you endured, became part of the record that defines how you are now approached, treated, and respected. Endurance is subtle, but its effect is profound. It changes the way systems operate around you, the way people calculate risks in your presence, and the way influence is distributed. When you endure long enough, you stop being optional in the calculations of power. You become inevitable. And that inevitability is the reason everything suddenly begins to shift in your favor. Number 10, the defender isn't emotional, they're strategic. What feels like sudden protection isn't born out of kindness or sentiment, it's calculated. The person, force, or system now defending you isn't moved by sympathy or your past struggles. They are responding to strategy, logic, and necessity. They see what was once ignored or dismissed and recognize that allowing you to remain vulnerable is no longer an option. Every decision to shield you is deliberate, every shift in circumstance is intentional, and every advantage created in your favor is part of a larger plan. Protection that arrives this way doesn't waste energy on explanations or apologies. It doesn't negotiate with the past or linger in sentimentality. It works quietly and effectively, neutralizing threats, opening doors, and ensuring that what should move forward moves forward. Those who defend you strategically calculate risk, outcome, and alignment. They know that letting resistance continue unchecked would create chaos, loss, or disruption that is unnecessary and costly. This kind of protection also explains why it appears sudden. It looks like overnight change because the work behind it, the calculations, assessments, and positioning, has already been done silently. When intervention happens, it lands decisively, with precision, and without fanfare. The defender isn't reacting emotionally. They are executing strategy. The implications are profound. It means that the people or forces now acting in your favor have considered every angle. They aren't impressed by your past or swayed by your pleas. They are ensuring outcomes that make sense for the bigger picture. And that makes this form of protection far more powerful than anything motivated by empathy alone. The subtle brilliance of strategic defense is that it protects you without creating dependency. It doesn't favor weakness or delay growth. It recognizes your value, ensures stability, and aligns circumstances so that your presence becomes unavoidable. The defender's logic guarantees that your path forward is not just cleared, it is secure, measured, and irreversible. When protection arrives like this, it is proof that the world is finally playing by the rules you've already mastered. Number 11. The same system that ignored you is now correcting itself. For a long time, it may have felt like the world, or the system around you, was against you. Doors were closed, opportunities delayed, voices silent, and resistance constant. It seemed personal, unfair, and deliberate. But the truth is, the system never actually targeted you specifically. It was operating according to its own rules, structures, and priorities, which at the time didn't account for your readiness, your persistence, or your value. What once ignored you is now recalibrating because your presence can no longer be overlooked. Systems don't apologize. They adjust. They have a way of realigning themselves when imbalance becomes too costly or disruptive. What felt like random obstacles or delays wasn't punishment. It was simply the system running according to its default. Now that the variables have changed, your endurance, your consistency, your growth, the system itself has no choice but to correct. The flip feels sudden because you don't see the gears turning behind the scenes, but the correction is inevitable once the conditions are met. This correction doesn't come with explanations or recognition. It doesn't acknowledge your struggle or validate your patience. It simply shifts outcomes. People who once blocked your path find the rules no longer favor them. Opportunities that were impossible yesterday suddenly appear, not because someone is being generous, but because the system is recalculating based on alignment, risk, and necessity. Resistance loses meaning when the system adjusts. What once mattered becomes irrelevant. The most powerful part of this process is that it happens without effort from you. You don't have to negotiate, explain, or fight. The system responds automatically to the new reality you've created, simply by enduring, growing, and being consistent. Your readiness, resilience, and alignment have forced the recalibration. The shift isn't random luck or external intervention alone, it's structural. The same environment that ignored you now acts in your favor because it cannot afford to do otherwise. When this happens, everything moves smoothly, not because the world has changed its mind, but because the system has no choice but to recognize the value it previously overlooked. Number 12. You're being protected because you're about to be visible. Protection rarely arrives randomly. It doesn't show up because someone feels like it or because the universe suddenly decided to be nice. It arrives because your presence, your potential, and your influence are about to be exposed, and exposure requires shielding. The moment you step into visibility, into prominence, influence, or impact, forces that once went unnoticed or unchecked become a liability. That's why protection appears suddenly, fiercely, and decisively, as if someone flipped a switch. For a long time, you may have felt invisible, overlooked, or underestimated. That invisibility allowed interference, delays, and attacks to pass by without consequence. But the moment your trajectory aligns with visibility, everything changes. People who ignored you before suddenly hesitate. Obstacles that were once aggressive or consistent start dissolving. Doors open in ways that seem improbable, and energy shifts around you without explanation. Protection doesn't prevent exposure. It ensures it can happen without collapse. This type of protection is strategic. It's not sentimental. It doesn't negotiate with opposition. It neutralizes what would disrupt your emergence. It recognizes that your visibility will change dynamics, shift perceptions, and demand acknowledgement. Without it, what is coming could be overwhelming. With it, you move forward confidently, and resistance loses relevance because the forces that could oppose you are already calculated, aligned, or deterred. The irony is that the protection you receive is directly proportional to the impact you're about to have. The bigger the shift, the more fiercely the system guards you, even if you don't notice it at first. This is why the flip feels sudden, like overnight transformation. You didn't earn it through charm or persuasion. You earned it by reaching a point where your emergence mattered too much to be ignored. Being protected at the moment of visibility is proof that timing, preparation, and alignment matter more than effort alone. It shows that the world, whether people, systems, or forces, is ready to respond to the influence you are about to unleash. The protection is not random, it's inevitable, calculated, and necessary for the breakthrough that is already unfolding. Number 13. The flip feels sudden, but it was decided long ago. What looks like an overnight change is rarely random. The moment everything shifts, the doors opening, the resistance fading, the sudden alignment of people and circumstances, it feels immediate, almost miraculous. But the truth is, the outcome was determined long before you noticed. Decisions, calculations, and alignments happen quietly, often behind the scenes, and what appears sudden is simply the execution of what was already set in motion. For a long time, it may have felt like life was dragging, like nothing you did mattered. You endured delays, opposition, and obstacles that seemed relentless. Those challenges weren't accidents. They were part of a timeline that needed to unfold. Every struggle, every season of waiting, every test of patience was quietly shaping the conditions necessary for the flip. The world didn't suddenly decide to favor you. It simply reached the point where all the pieces aligned. The invisible work, what you can't see, has always been happening. Influences were shifting, people were observing, systems were recalibrating, and opportunities were quietly being positioned. The flip doesn't occur because someone suddenly changed their mind. It occurs because all the assessments, all the evaluations, and all the unseen forces reached a conclusion. The moment has arrived. What was inevitable can seem sudden to those caught in the current, but in reality, it's the result of preparation, endurance, and timing intersecting perfectly. This is why the change feels effortless from your perspective. You didn't have to manipulate, argue, or demand recognition. The structure around you simply executed what had already been determined. What once blocked you, delayed you, or opposed you is now either neutralized or irrelevant. Because the decision to allow your breakthrough was made long before it became visible. Understanding this shifts your perspective. The suddenness isn't luck or randomness, it's inevitability. The flip was always coming. You only see it now because the timing, the alignment, and the readiness have finally met. And in that realization, it becomes clear. The world's shift in your favor is the natural consequence of forces that were quietly working on your behalf all along. Number 14. This protection will reveal who was benefiting from your struggle. When someone or something steps in to defend you, it doesn't just shield you from harm, it exposes the hidden truths around you. The same energy, the same system that once allowed attacks, delays, or resistance now flips in your favor. That shift acts like a spotlight, illuminating the people and forces who are quietly profiting from your struggles, setbacks, or invisibility. Suddenly, the ones who thrived while you were suppressed become obvious because the balance has changed and their advantage disappears overnight. This is the subtle power of protection. It doesn't just save you, it clarifies the environment around you. Those who were benefiting from your exhaustion, your patience, or your quiet endurance now reveal themselves, often unintentionally. Their discomfort, hesitation, or reaction to your newfound defense shows you exactly who was aligned with your suppression and who merely pretended to be neutral. The truth doesn't come through confrontation. It comes through observation of behavior once the power dynamics shift. The irony is striking. While they hope to stay invisible in their gain, your protection unmasks them effortlessly. Actions they once took for granted, manipulations, delays, undermining moves, lose their effect. The moment the energy around you changes, those who relied on your struggle are forced to recalibrate, reveal their motives, or step aside. Their presence becomes transparent because they no longer control the outcome. This revelation isn't about revenge. It's about awareness. It shows you the real landscape, who is genuine, who is opportunistic, and who only exists in your life because it served them. With that clarity comes power. You now move forward knowing exactly who matters, who supports, and who merely watched while you carried the weight. Protection doesn't just defend, it transforms. It shields, aligns, and reveals. In its wake, the truth about who benefited from your struggle becomes undeniable. And when that happens, you are no longer blind to the hidden forces around you, giving you a level of insight and authority that only comes when the world finally flips in your favor. Conclusion. Everything you've endured, every delay, every attack, every season of invisibility or resistance, it was never wasted. Every obstacle was quietly shaping you, preparing you and positioning you for the moment when the world could no longer ignore your presence. The flip that feels sudden, the fierce protection that appears overnight, the alignment that shifts everything in your favor. It's not luck, sympathy, or coincidence. It is the result of endurance, timing, and unseen forces recalibrating around your truth. What once held you down now serves as proof of your strength. What was meant to suppress you now illuminates your resilience. The narrative others tried to impose has collapsed because you outgrew it. The system that ignored you has corrected itself, authority has shifted, and someone or something is guarding you strategically because your emergence matters too much to be left unchecked. Every challenge you faced, every struggle you survived, and every obstacle you navigated has led to this undeniable turning point. This is more than protection. It's validation. It's a moment where everything aligns in your favor, where the resistance fades and where clarity emerges about who matters, who was genuine, and who only benefited from your struggle. You are no longer optional. You are now inevitable. So stand in your breakthrough, embrace the shift, and let the world recalibrate around your presence. Everything is moving in your favor because you endured, because you persisted, and because you became ready for the moment that was always meant for you. If this message spoke to you, make sure you don't just watch. Take action. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment to let us know how this shift resonates in your life. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment of truth, insight, and inspiration that empowers you to step fully into your purpose. Stay blessed always.